Hello, and welcome to the third public involvement meeting for the I-39, 90, 94 corridor study. My name is David Schmidt, and I am the project manager for this corridor study. Today we will present a study overview, the study's purpose and corridor needs, and remaining alternatives. Then we will spend a little time discussing the flooding mitigation options. We will finish up the presentation with some information on how the noise analysis works, study schedule, next steps, and contact information. Please feel free to reach out with any comments or questions throughout the study. Before we go into detail on this study, I wanted to give a little background into what an environmental study is. An environmental study is performed to consider potential impacts on the environment of proposed alternatives. They are performed before final design can begin on a transportation project. Final design and construction funds have not been allocated for the I-39-9094 corridor at this time. Now, let's talk about this study, which covers 67 miles of I-39, 90, and 94 through Dane, Columbia, Sauk, and Juneau counties. The limits are from US 1218 in Madison to US 12, Wisconsin 16 in the Wisconsin Dells. The study also covers a portion of I-39 from its split with I-90-94 to Levy Road in Portage. The bridges over the Wisconsin River and the Wisconsin 60 interchange will be reconstructed prior to any potential construction from this study and are therefore not included in the study. Also, County V, which has been discussed previously at PIMs for this study, will now be studied and constructed as part of a separate project. This study is limited to on and near existing alignment alternatives, which I'll cover later in the presentation. I want to emphasize that bypass alternatives that had been considered with a previous study are no longer being considered. Here you can see the study's purpose is to address existing and future traffic demands, safety issues, aging and outdated corridor infrastructure, and corridor resiliency. The corridor needs include traffic. Traffic volumes along the corridor, especially truck traffic, are increasing. That causes vehicle congestion and backups along the interstate at times of heavy traffic, like rush hour and Friday and Sunday afternoons in the summer. Because this is an interstate corridor, much of the evaluation relates to automotive traffic. However, WSDOT is also looking at bicycle, pedestrian, and transit traffic at intersections and other crossroads. Safety. Crash rates along the study corridor, especially at interchanges, exceed the statewide average crash rates. Congestion and outdated roadway designs contribute to crashes. Pavement. Pavement along the corridor is in need of rehabilitation, maintenance, or replacement. If this study doesn't move forward as a project, it's anticipated that rehabilitation maintenance projects will be needed in 26 of the next 30 years somewhere along the study corridor. Each of those projects would require lane closures and cause traffic impacts. Bridges. Many of the bridges along the corridor also need work. By the year 2030, 84 of the 113, or around 75%, of the structures within the study corridor will be over 50 years old, and many do not meet current design standards. Flooding. Flooding is also a concern in areas of the corridor, as both I-39 and I-994 are in low areas as they cross the Baraboo and Wisconsin rivers. WSDOT also reviews environmental impacts, agency and public input, and costs when evaluating how to meet the corridor needs. Most of the remainder of this presentation will take you through the alternatives that are being carried forward for further study in the draft environmental impact statement. WSDOT is carrying alternatives forward based on how well they meet purpose and need factors, their impact to the environment, public feedback received, and cost. All alternatives considered are available to view online on the I-39-9094 study website. Here are the items that we would like your feedback on today. For those attending an in-person PIM, there are surveys available for you to fill out to state your preference related to intersection control, like stop signs, roundabouts, or traffic signals, and alternatives throughout the corridor. Everyone has the ability to fill out the survey online using the QR code shown here. I'll start with the remaining alternatives on the mainline and then move to each interchange along the corridor. We have two remaining mainline alternatives. Both are what we call modernization alternatives. So what is modernization? Modernization is basically a term we use when we plan to upgrade infrastructure to meet current or modern standards whenever possible. Here, you can see the cross-section of the two modernization alternatives moving forward for further study, and how they compare to the existing roadway footprint. These cross-sections represent what the roadway looks like in most areas. There are some areas, particularly between the I-94 Wisconsin 30 interchange and the US 151 interchange, where both alternatives are wider than this. Both alternatives have 12-foot lanes and typically have 12-foot shoulders. The one exception to 12-foot shoulders is in the modernization hybrid alternative, where we have 18-foot shoulders that could be used as a managed lane. A managed lane is a lane that uses the inside shoulder to travel during peak hours or when needed. It is a dynamic operation that is monitored and only turned on when needed. This is shown above in the blue highlighted area. The overall width of the modernization plus added general purpose lanes alternative is 12 feet wider than the modernization with managed lanes alternative. This added width is because the modernization hybrid uses the shoulder when additional capacity is needed, and the modernization plus added general purpose lanes adds a lane at all times, so no cars need to drive next to the barrier wall. It should be noted that managed lanes are not always open when needed. It is anticipated that 25% of the days when the managed lanes are open, they could be partially or fully closed due to incidents, large snow events, power outages, or other reasons. The two remaining mainline alternatives are identical from Wisconsin 19 to the northern project limit, but I'd like to talk through the pros and cons of the modernization hybrid and the modernization plus added general purpose lane alternatives in the area that they differ, from US 1218 to Wisconsin 19. The overall width of the modernization hybrid is 12 feet less than the modernization plus added general purpose lane alternative. That doesn't mean the additional right-of-way is needed along the entire corridor, but in certain areas. More real estate may be needed for the modernization plus added general purpose lane alternative when compared to the modernization hybrid alternative. The additional infrastructure would result in an upfront cost for the modernization hybrid that is slightly less than the modernization plus added general purpose lane alternative. However, the modernization hybrid is more costly to maintain and operate. For that reason, the modernization hybrid becomes more costly within 8 to 15 years of preliminary construction. Predictive safety is the biggest variance between the two alternatives. The modernization hybrid is expected to reduce total crashes by 3% and fatal and injury crashes by 1% compared to a modernization of existing lanes alternative, while the modernization plus added general purpose lane is expected to reduce total crashes by 30% and fatal injury crashes by 28%. To help put that into context, there have been approximately 30 fatal injury crashes every year on this stretch of highway. A reduction of 28% is approximately 8 fewer accidents per year and more people getting home to their families. Some other items that we're taking into consideration include traffic demand. For example, the modernization hybrid alternative adds a lone lane on the inside shoulder. However, larger traffic demands are to and from ramps along the outside of the roadway, especially from US 1218 to I-94 Wisconsin 30. The start and end points of the modernization hybrid alternative adds additional decision points. Lane drops can have higher crash rates because of traffic weaving and merging conflicts. Finally, a hybrid alternative operates more effectively with a larger percentage of familiar drivers, local commuters. High truck volumes are present on all days, and high volumes of unfamiliar recreational drivers are present on high traffic Fridays and Sundays. For the section from I-39 I-994 split to the US 12 Wisconsin 16 interchange, both the modernization plus added general purpose lane and the modernization hybrid alternative have the same proposed cross-section, which includes 12-foot inside and outside shoulders and 3 12-foot lanes. There is no managed lane proposed for this segment of roadway. Moving on now to the interchanges along the corridor. Here are the 15 existing and 2 potential new interchanges being evaluated. Please note that I'll skip over the County V interchange and the Wisconsin 60 interchange in the presentation. County V is anticipated to be reconstructed as a separate project in the next few years, and Wisconsin 60 was recently reconstructed. Exhibits regarding these alternatives and those that WisDOT is not moving forward with will be available for viewing at the in-person PIMs in Madison and Wisconsin Dells and are located on the project's website. Today I will cover these interchanges from south to north. We will start by looking at the I-94 Wisconsin 30 interchange. Some people also refer to this as the Badger interchange. WisDOT is moving forward with the full modernization number 2 alternative at this location. This alternative would remove all left-hand entrance and exit ramps and has a simpler geometry than the full modernization number 1 alternative. Weave movements are reduced, and the ramp speeds would be closer to the speeds of the main freeway traffic. There is one relocation of a municipal maintenance facility required. This alternative is showing possible pedestrian and/or bicycle accommodations along Milwaukee Street. Accommodations are intended to be installed as shown in blue, pending community agreement, final design considerations, and the ability to acquire real estate. Moving slightly east now, This is a potential new interchange at Milwaukee Street that WSDOT is investigating based on a request from the City of Madison. We investigated a diamond interchange and a partial cloverleaf interchange at this location and are moving forward with the partial cloverleaf alternative, primarily due to the added weave length that's provided between this interchange and the I-3990 and the I-94 Wisconsin 30 interchange that we just discussed on the previous slide. That added weave length is safer than the shorter length that could be accommodated with a diamond alternative. This alternative also has lower wetland impacts. Both alternatives require the relocation of an agricultural barn shown with the orange diamond. This alternative is showing possible pedestrian and/or bicycle accommodations along Milwaukee Street. Accommodations are intended to be installed as shown in blue, pending community agreement, final design considerations, and the ability to acquire real estate. It's important to note that this interchange is dependent upon local funding from the City of Madison. WSDOT is performing an intersection control evaluation between roundabouts and signals at the ramp terminals and are looking for your input on the type of intersection control that you prefer. See the QR code here if you'd like to fill out the survey online. There are also paper surveys available for those attending in person. At US 151, our remaining alternative is a directional interchange. The primary movements to and from the freeway portion of US 151 are free-flow ramps that will be much closer to freeway speeds than the existing cloverleaf ramps. There's also an embedded diamond that services East Washington, and a half-diamond interchange that services High Crossing Boulevard. This alternative moves the US 151 interchange at Nelson Road American Parkway to an extension of East Park Boulevard to create a greater distance between that interchange and the interstate interchange. Overall, this alternative addresses travel demands better than the other alternatives and has a relatively low environmental impact compared to other alternatives. This alternative is showing a possible pedestrian and/or bicycle path along US 151. Accommodations are intended to be installed as shown in blue, pending community agreement, final design considerations, and the ability to acquire real estate. We'd like your input on interchange type at both the I-39 9094 and US 151 Diamond Interchange and the US 151 and East Park Boulevard. At I-39 9094 and US 151, we are performing an intersection control evaluation between a standard diamond interchange with signals at the ramp terminals or a single-point urban interchange, SPUI. The image shown here is for the standard diamond with signals. And here is an alternative with a SPUI. All traffic is controlled by a single set of traffic signals located in the center of the intersection. A SPUI is currently in place at the US 12, US 53 interchange in Eau Claire and at the Verona Road interchange with the Beltline in Madison. More information on SPUIs can be found on WSDOT's website. Next, we'll move to the US 151 interchange with the reconfigured Nelson Road interchange, which will be moved to East Park Boulevard. Here, we would like your feedback on a preference between signals or roundabouts. Next, we'll spend a little time talking about collector-distributor, or CD lanes. We're proposing utilizing them in two locations within the corridor, on Mainline I-39 9094 from the I-94 Wisconsin 30 interchange to the US 151 interchange, and on the freeway segment of US 151 from I-39 9094 to just northeast of the Nelson Road East Park Boulevard interchange. The graphics shown here are for the I-39 9094 segment. As you can see, collector-distributor roads run parallel to the mainline traffic and are used to separate mainline traffic from merging traffic. Eventually, collector-distributor lanes merge back into the mainline traffic. I'll walk through a few examples. Here, if you're traveling eastbound along Wisconsin 30 in green and you'd like to go northbound on I-39 994, you'll travel along this ramp in yellow, which enters the collector-distributor lanes in orange that are merely east of the mainline travel lanes. There is then a decision point where you can either stay to the left to merge onto mainline I-39 94 in blue, or stay to the right to exit to US 151 interchange, shown in red. Note that if you want to exit at High Crossing Boulevard, you'd stay to the left to merge onto mainline I-39 94, and then exit to High Crossing Boulevard. This configuration makes it so that traffic traveling eastbound out of Madison that wants to access US 151 never have to enter the mainline lanes of I-39 94. Similarly, traffic entering I-39 94 southbound from US 151 that's looking to exit at I-94 Wisconsin 30 to go east or west doesn't need to enter mainline traffic. Next, let's take a look at the collector-distributor lanes along US 151. I'll start by continuing from the previous example. If you decide to stay right to exit to US 151 in red, you get another decision point where you could either stay to the left for mainline US 151 traveling towards Sun Prairie, shown in purple, or exit to the US 151 collector-distributor road, shown in pink, so you could access the Nelson Road East Park Boulevard exit, shown in yellow. If you did need to access US 151 after taking the exit to the collector-distributor roads, you could also merge back onto US 151 at this point too, shown in orange. Now let's take a look at traveling in the other direction. If you're traveling southbound on US 151, your decision point occurs northeast of the new Nelson Road East Park Boulevard interchange. If you're looking to continue southbound along US 151 to East Washington Avenue, you will actually exit prior to the Nelson Road East Park Boulevard exit, shown in yellow. This collector-distributor road then picks up additional traffic from the Nelson Road East Park Boulevard interchange, seen in blue, before continuing on to East Washington Avenue interchange with I-39 984. If you're looking to access I-39 9094 or the Nelson Road East Park Boulevard interchange, you'd stay to the left, shown in red. The exit to Nelson Road East Park Boulevard is shown here in green. All traffic looking at access of I-39 94 would once again stay to the left and continue until a diverge point at the I-39 94 and US 151 interchange. Traffic looking to travel south would stay to the left, shown in purple, and all traffic looking to travel north would stay to the right, shown in orange. Moving slightly north now, this is the potential new interchange at Hepker Road. WSDOT is moving forward with the shifted diamond alternative. The freeway would need to be shifted to the east to allow enough room for the ramps on the west side of the freeway. This would require residential relocation on the east side of the freeway, shown with an orange diamond. This alternative requires significantly less real estate acquisition than the other alternative considered. This alternative is showing possible pedestrian and/or bicycle accommodations along Hepker Road. Accommodations are intended to be installed as shown in blue, pending community agreement, final design considerations, and the ability to acquire real estate. Similar to the Milwaukee Street interchange, an interchange at Hepker Road is dependent upon local funding. We'd like your feedback here on your preferred intersection control type between signals or roundabouts. The next interchange is the US 51 interchange. We are looking at a partial cloverleaf alternative that would have a similar configuration to the existing interchange. There are some changes that will be made to improve the existing safety concerns. The on-ramps will merge together prior to merging onto the freeway. This alternative would also remove US 51 access to North American Lane and Dantiel Road, which would improve safety. This alternative better addresses the existing and future travel demands than the other alternative considered. It would also be less costly. This alternative is showing a possible pedestrian and bicycle path along the east side of US 51. Accommodations are intended to be installed as shown in blue, pending community agreement, final design considerations, and the ability to acquire real estate. Here, we are looking for your input on the intersection control for the southbound off-ramp between a stop sign or a signal. We know that the northbound off-ramp requires a signal based on operations. At the Wisconsin 19 interchange, WSDOT will be further evaluating the U-ramp alternative. This alternative consolidates intersections along Wisconsin 19 by combining the entrance location of the northbound on-ramp to the same location as the southbound on-ramp. The northbound on-ramp then loops under the interstate and goes over Wisconsin 19 before merging onto I-39 994. The alternative also removes a signalized intersection by realigning the northbound off-ramp to County CV. That allows for the removal of the signals at the existing northbound off-ramp. The alternative increases capacity along Wisconsin 19 from 4 lanes to 6 lanes from Pepsi Way to Tierney Crossing. We know that signals are required along Wisconsin 19. Overall, this alternative better addresses safety compared to the other alternatives while providing capacity needed along Wisconsin 19. This alternative is showing a possible pedestrian and bicycle path along the north side of Wisconsin 19. Accommodations are intended to be installed as shown in blue, pending community agreement, final design considerations, and the ability to acquire the real estate. Before we move to the County CS interchange, I'd like to note that we're going to skip over the County V interchange, as that interchange is now being evaluated as part of another study, and also the Wisconsin 60 interchange, which was recently reconstructed. WSDOT will carry forward a diamond alternative at County CS. This alternative reconstructs County CS and the bridge over the interstate and provides a divided median and protected left turn lanes onto the interstate entrance ramps. Both the on and off ramp lengths are increased to better allow for speeds at or near interstate speeds at the ramp merge points. This alternative better addresses safety and has 500 feet of less stream bed relocation compared to the partial cloverleaf alternative. At this location, we would like your feedback on your preference between stop signs or roundabouts. At the I-39, I-90-94 split, the low build alternative will move forward for further study. This alternative will improve safety by removing the Cascade Mountain interchange, which was too close to the split interchange. Instead, access to Cascade Mountain will be available through the embedded Wisconsin 78 Diamond interchange. All system-to-system movements are right-hand ramps with speeds close to the mainline speed. This alternative is not as tall or as costly as other alternatives. There are 3 levels in this alternative. I-94 is the lowest level. Then, Wisconsin 78 is the next level, followed by the flyover ramps at the top level. Roundabouts will be placed at the connections of Cascade Mountain Road and the Wisconsin 78, as well as the Diamond Interchange ramp terminals. At the Wisconsin 33 interchange at I-39, WSDOT will be further studying a Diamond interchange. This alternative requires less real estate from the Pine Island State Wildlife Area than the partial cloverleaf alternative. This alternative would add a divided median to protect Wisconsin 33 left-turning traffic onto the interstate entrance ramps. The interchange's elevation is also raised to help address flooding issues. At this location, we're looking for your input on your preference between stop signs or roundabouts. At Wisconsin 33 at I-90-94, WSDOT is going to further evaluate a partial cloverleaf, which would reconstruct the existing interchange in a similar footprint while raising the grade of the interchange to help mitigate flooding. Acceleration and deceleration lanes would be lengthened, and a divided median to protect Wisconsin 33 left-turning traffic onto the interstate on-ramps would be added. This alternative has much less right-of-way needed and saves over 10 acres in wetland, as well as reduces the impact to the floodplain. At this location, we would like your input on your preference of stop signs or roundabouts. At the US 12 interchange, the divergent diamond alternative will move forward for further study. This alternative allows for free-flow left turns to the entrance ramps. The ramp alignments will improve sight distance, allowing for improved driver reaction time. This alternative addresses safety better and has slightly lower environmental impacts than the other alternatives for this area. Since this is a divergent diamond interchange, the terminals will be controlled by signals. This alternative is showing a possible pedestrian and bicycle path along the east side of US 12. Accommodations are intended to be installed as shown in blue, pending community agreement, final design considerations, and the ability to acquire the real estate. Moving on now to the Wisconsin 23 interchange, where WSDOT will further evaluate a diamond interchange, which would have a similar but slightly smaller footprint than the existing interchange. WSDOT would slightly realign ramp alignments to improve sight distances for improved driver reaction time. This alternative is showing a possible pedestrian and/or bicycle accommodations along Wisconsin 23. Accommodations are intended to be installed as shown in blue, pending community agreement, final design considerations, and the ability to acquire the real estate. This alternative has minimal environmental impacts and has adequately managed traffic demands at the lowest cost. At the Wisconsin 13 interchange, we are carrying 2 alternatives forward for further consideration in the environmental document. We would like your input into which alternative you prefer. We'll start with the split diamond alternative, which would directly connect County H to the interstate. This alternative would have northbound off and southbound on ramps connect to Wisconsin 13, while the northbound on and the southbound off ramps connect to County H with one-way frontage roads on either side of the interstate. This is a similar configuration to the Wisconsin 26 Watertown Street interchange in Johnson Creek. This alternative has more environmental impacts than the Trumpet interchange that we'll discuss next. The cost is also higher for this alternative, and this alternative relocates 3 buildings shown with an orange diamond. There is also some driveway removals at the hotel along County H. This alternative is showing possible pedestrian and/or bicycle accommodations along County H. Accommodations are intended to be installed as shown in blue, pending community agreement, final design considerations, and the ability to acquire real estate. For this alternative, We'd like your feedback on your preferred for stop signs or roundabouts at the 4 intersections of the interchange. Next, we'll move to the trumpet alternative at the Wisconsin 13 interchange. This has a similar configuration to the existing interchange, but improves ramp curvature to allow for speeds closer to interstate speeds when entering and exiting the interstate. There is also longer acceleration and deceleration lanes. There's no direct access to County H as access remains the same as it is today. This alternative only requires 1 relocation compared to the 3 for the split diamond alternative. Less right-of-way is required, and driveways would need to be removed. Again, we'd like your feedback on which of the 2 alternatives you prefer. Now we'll move on to our final interchange at US 12, Wisconsin 16, where WisDOT will further study the diamond alternative. This alternative reconstructs the existing interchange in a similar footprint with improved ramp design to provide better sight distance, which improves driver reaction time. The alternative provides protected left turn lanes on US 12, Wisconsin 16 to interstate on-ramp. The alternative also realigns US 12, Wisconsin 16 and the 60th Street intersection to improve sight distance. This alternative has slightly fewer impacts compared to the other alternative considered and got better public feedback as the other alternative removed access to 60th Street. Next, we will talk about the flooding scene on the corridor. The Baraboo River near the I-39, I-90-94 split flooded in 2008, closing both I-39 and I-90-94 for several days. The Baraboo River flooded again in 2018, which partially closed I-90-94. Alternate travel routes for the 2008 flooding added 66 miles of indirection and increased travel time by over an hour. WisDOT is currently evaluating 4 scenarios that would raise the interstate elevation and add or lengthen bridges to help mitigate flooding across the interstate. WisDOT is coordinating with multiple agencies regarding proposed mitigation measures, including the Wisconsin DNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and FEMA, who all have properties adjacent to the study corridor, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency, who will have an opportunity to review the floodplain analysis in the draft environmental impact statement. Our mitigation goal for this project is to minimize and balance flood impacts to surrounding properties. We'll be performing 2 types of mitigation with the project. We're going to raise the elevation of the interstate in the area past flood events, and we'll add or widen bridges on I-39 to better accommodate flood events. The next 4 slides show the 4 remaining concepts. These 4 slides are for informational purposes. WisDOT will be working with agencies mentioned on the previous slide, local communities, and the adjacent landowners to determine the appropriate alternative. Once selected, that alternative will be included in the final roadway preferred alternative. Option A would construct 3 2,000-foot floodplain bridges on I-39 and raise both I-39 and I-90-94. This concept would act very similar as today for large stormwater events, since instead of water going over the interstate, it would go through the 5 bridges shown. The larger difference is for smaller storm events, since it is now much easier to have water flow through I-39 than in existing conditions, which may increase flood risk to downstream residents for more frequent events including a 2-year or 10-year flood event. The area shown in red hatching is expected to see a rise in water surface elevation during the smaller flood events. The 3 2,000-foot bridges are much larger than other alternatives, are expensive, and require significant maintenance. This concept also does not expand the existing Baraboo River Bridge, so the alternative does not mimic the original Baraboo floodplain. Option C2 would add a new 250-foot long floodplain bridge north of the Baraboo River Bridge, would widen the Baraboo River Bridge to 250 feet, and would raise I-39 and I-90-94. This alternative has fewer bridges that aren't as long as those in Option A, and protects the properties along Wisconsin 33 east of I-39. The widening of the Baraboo River Bridge reintroduces upstream and downstream connectivity to better mimic the legacy of the Baraboo River floodplain. Like all remaining alternatives, this alternative would require a regulatory FEMA map change. Option C3 would add a 250-foot wide floodplain bridge between Wisconsin 33 and the Wisconsin River, would widen the Baraboo River Bridge to 250 feet, and would raise I-39 and I-90-94. This option would perform the closest to the current pattern of flooding. While no new flooding patterns are introduced, properties along Wisconsin 33 east of I-39 continue to be impacted. Similar to option C2, the widening of the Baraboo River Bridge reintroduces upstream-downstream connectivity to better mimic the legacy of the Baraboo River floodplain, and would require a regulatory FEMA map change. Finally, Option C4 would widen the Baraboo Bridge to 500 feet and raise I-39 and I-994. This alternative would result in up to a 1 to 1.5 foot rise in the locations seen on the map that are red. This alternative does not require any new bridges and provides the largest width of all the alternatives for the Baraboo River Bridge. This results in a reconnection of the natural historic Baraboo River floodplain at I-39. This alternative minimizes the downstream impacts, where there are more private properties, and improves the potential flood risk for private properties east of I-39. While this alternative has the largest upstream rise, it is almost entirely on publicly owned land, either the Wisconsin DNR or U.S. Fish and Wildlife. This alternative also has the highest benefit cost to ratio. I'd briefly like to touch on noise analysis. Traffic noise analysis starts with the development of a traffic noise model, or a TNM. The TNM is used to measure existing sound levels, develop an existing noise model, and predict future sound levels. Next, impacted receptors are considered for noise abatement measures. Impacted receptors are either receptors with a predicted future traffic sound level which approaches or exceeds the WSDOT noise level criteria for considering barriers for different land use categories. Noise level criteria are divided into land use categories that include residential areas, serene quiet lands, parks, schools, hotels, offices, etc., or when the predicted future traffic sound levels exceed existing levels by 15 decibels or more. In order for abatement to be provided, it must be feasible, reasonable, and likely be incorporated. A noise barrier is considered reasonable if the total cost of the noise barrier doesn't exceed $50,000 per benefited receptor. To be considered benefited, a receptor must receive a minimum of 8 decibel noise reduction. In addition, a minimum of one receptor or common use area must achieve the department's noise reduction design goal of 9 decibels. A noise barrier is considered feasible if a minimum of one impacted receptor or common use area achieves a 5 decibel noise reduction. In addition, abatement that is feasible must be constructible, compatible with the project's purpose and need, meet design criteria and guidance, and not result in other impacts that would offset the noise reduction benefits. Proposed noise barrier locations will be presented at the I-39-9094 study public hearing in the summer of 2024. Should a proposed noise barrier be considered reasonable and feasible, a vote will be taken of the benefited receptors. Voting would occur after the study and during final design. A barrier must receive a vote of support from a simple majority of all votes cast by the benefited receptors to be constructed. Before we wrap up this presentation, we will review the study schedule and next steps. We held our first public involvement meeting in September of 2022 and our second in April of 2023. After PIM number 2, the Federal Highway Administration published a Notice of Intent in the Federal Register. The Notice of Intent formally announced FHWA's intention to prepare an environmental impact statement. The notice was the formal start of a 30-day public comment period where additional formal comments were provided on any aspect of the study, including the purpose and need, the range of alternatives, or impacts WSDOT and FHWA should consider in the environmental impact statement. This information can be found on the study's environmental information webpage. In addition to the public scoping process, we'll take feedback from the 3 PIMs into account in the draft environmental impact statement. A public hearing is scheduled to take place in summer of 2024. Testimony from the public hearing will be taken into account when developing the final EIS and record of decision, which will be complete by winter of 2024. Final design and construction are not yet funded for this project. Should the Transportation Projects Commission recommend enumeration of this project after the final EIS and record of decision, a final design and construction schedule would be developed at that time. While the PIMs provide a great opportunity to provide feedback to WSDOT, we encourage your input at any time through the project's website or by reaching out to me via phone or email. Thank you for taking the time today to listen to updates regarding this very important study. Should you or anyone you know have questions or would like additional information regarding this study, you may reach out via any of the options provided on this slide. You can also scan these QR codes to get to the study webpage or the PIM materials.